Great. Thank you, Chairman Peters. And appreciate your holding this hearing and continuing our discussion, which we began on Tuesday, about the persistent threat of domestic terrorism and violent extremism. As I said earlier this week, these threats are affecting communities all across our country, and I want to be sure that as we go through these hearings, we recognize that. They transcend racial, ethnic, and religious lines, and as we heard on Tuesday, significantly increased threats against members of law enforcement, the military, and government. In fact, that was based on the data that had been compiled that we heard about on Tuesday. That was where most of the actual threats and acts had been committed. So we have a problem, and the internet, as Senator Hassan and a lot of our experts pointed out, has exacerbated the problem, both in terms of spreading disinformation and creating some of the conditions for violent extremism, but also in terms of organizing some of the hateful acts. On Tuesday, the witnesses highlighted many important points we will discuss today, including that virtually all domestic terrorists, inspired by a range of these ideological beliefs on the right and left, do use the internet and social media platforms to release propaganda, coordinate training, raise funds, recruit members, and incite violence here at home. The administration must be more transparent and provide the necessary data for us to have a comprehensive understanding of the current threat landscape. That's something that was talked about a lot by all groups, is information, data, having the facts. Going forward, we need to talk about solutions and areas where more congressional action is needed to address these threats effectively. I think that was a conclusion. I think today we'll talk more about solutions, which I think is very helpful. I also appreciated the multiple witnesses on Tuesday testified that the Homeland Security's Nonprofit Security Grant Program has been helpful to nonprofits who have applied for funds they can use to secure their facilities. We have worked hard in this committee to authorize that program, to expand it. We're pleased that we were able to get a authorization signed into law last year. The data shows that despite the expansion of this program, there are many states that are not taking full advantage of it and the tools that it provides. So we're committed to ensuring that those states, nonprofits, religious institutions are not just aware of the program, but using it to utilize it to protect themselves from the increasing threats. I was also pleased to hear witnesses express on Tuesday support for the Pray Safe Act that I authored and introduced with Senator Hassan, who's here this morning. This is the legislation that creates the federal clearinghouse that I think is as important, maybe more important than the funding, is to be sure people have access to information on safety, on best practices in the security realm, available federal grant programs, including the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, and training opportunities. I hope we can get that legislation passed. It's already been reported out of this committee. That said, it's clear that more does need to be done. Determining what solutions and tools are needed requires us to hear not just from the private entities, but of course from federal officials, current federal officials responsible for understanding and addressing these threats. Next month, the committee is planning its annual threats hearing, at which I expect domestic terrorism and violent extremism will play a significant role. Hearing from government officials on what the administration is doing to combat these threats, I think, is something that is overdue, and I hope we'll hear from them. In the interim, I'm pleased that today we'll be hearing from a former government official, in addition to subject matter experts and some of the community leaders being most affected by these threats. I appreciate the witnesses being here today. I look forward to hearing their testimony and particularly your recommendations on how Congress can do a better job in responding to these efforts and improve our federal efforts to combat terrorism and violent extremism in this country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.